Hi everyone, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplanty Goodness, and this essentially is a place where I like to geek out about my big passion, which is tropical houseplants. Now, today's video, I will warn you, is a slightly longer one, so strap in, grab some popcorn, grab a drink, let's dive into it. I was going to do about 2 or 3 videos for the entirety of the week. I think I might just leave it into one video and do one of my plant shelves, because I've just done a similar video on Instagram, and I know that that went quite long, and that one I've managed to chop down a bit into smaller chunks. Let me know, it's the first time that I'm going to be doing slightly longer videos. If you like the format of slightly longer videos and a bit more conversational, let me know and I'll do more of these. But let's dive into it. We will do one plant shelf. If you like this type of video and you want to see the rest of my plant shelves, bit of a sneak peek here. We've got the Philodendron esmeraldense into one of my other ones. Let me know and I'll do another video going through all the different shelves, and we might do like a month of the conservatory tour. We talk a bit more about each one of the plants that I have in my collection. Now, diving into the first plant that you might be able to see right at the top there is Monstera deliciosa, and that is a cutting that I chopped off my mother plant. I've got a very dear friend who is just in the process of buying a property now, and she loves Monstera deliciosa. She's always wanted to have one, but she's not had one, and she knows that it's really difficult to find more mature leaves that have got the fenestrations. So doing that from a fully mature leaf that has got fenestrations, I do know that that doesn't have secondary fenestrations yet. It doesn't have the holes in the middle of in the midrib of the leaf. But hopefully my mother plant might get that soon, and then I might be able to propagate from those types of leaves as well. But there's more of a chance with these more mature leaves that the leaves that cutting will start popping out, and that was a tip cutting as well, should be more on the mature side of things. Usually the first leaf will tend to look a bit more immature, but then the leaf after that should start emulating what the original cutting's maturity was like, basically. So that's one. Another one that I've got at the top, and I'll bring it down, is the Philodendron gigas, or gigas, depending on how people pronounce it. And you can see with this one, it's growing quite nicely. There is a new leaf that is happening right there. This has got very, very velvety leaves. The fully mature version of this in nature looks quite a bit different. But the other thing that you might want to notice on this one, I don't know whether or not it's going to show up there, it's also pupping as well. So there's some new foliage coming through, and I don't know whether or not you might be able to see, I've got a very tiny net pot, because actually the roots for this plant are exceptionally small for how much plant there is, and there's not very much of a root mass. So always pot up your plants not based on the foliage, but based on the root mass. Because if you give a huge pot because you've got a huge plant, but the roots are tiny, you will rot it out exceptionally quickly, because it won't be able to absorb all of that moisture that it's got within its environment, because there's too much soil, essentially. So that is the Philodendron gigas. Let me put that, I'll put this down here, because I've got another plant behind it that I want to show you. So give me a sec and I'll grab the next plant. Okay, the next plant is my Philodendron brantianum, and you can see some of the original leaves that I got as a cutting were quite small, but you can see now some of the newer leaves are finally getting much larger. It has got the telltale silver, and I don't think it's going to get picked up by the camera, the silver iridescence. Unfortunately, the 2 newest leaves, which were going to be even bigger, have had some mealybug damage. And I was talking about this with another plant friend the other day. I've moved to 3 different areas and 3 different houses in the last 7 or 8 years that I've been living in the city that I live in at the moment. And each house has had a different set of predominant pests. So the first house I was living in had huge problems with spider mites. So I was dealing with that all the time, less of everything else. The second property that I was at had a huge problems with thrips. So that got dealt with. And this property for sure seems to have a bit more of an issue with mealybugs. Mealybugs don't freak me out as much as thrips, because they do take a long time to go. Although at the moment, the way that the mealybugs are kind of spreading within my collection is quite worrying, considering how slowly they move and how slowly they procreate, essentially. So if anybody's got any suggestions other than alcohol spray or predatory insects for dealing with mealybugs, please do let me know. I would love to know a bit more about that because it's kind of getting slightly out of control, and I want to see if there's a faster way of me being able to deal with these pests before they take over all of my plants in my collection. So let me put this back down and let's move on to the next plant. Okay, moving on to the next plants, there might be plants that you might be able to see in front of you here. And I think I've done a video recently talking about my string of turtles, the Peperomia prostrata, and I'm not going to lift it up too much because it's one of those plants that will knot up exceptionally quickly. But it's doing really, really well. We've had some uncommonly sunny and exceptionally warm days here in the UK. And this was kind of in front of a south-facing window with a net curtain. It's about 2 meters back, and there's a 70% shade cloth above, and it's doing exceptionally well. You can see next to it as well. I don't know whether or not you might be able to see. I'm not going to move the big plant again because it knots up, but I do have a very, very small cutting of it here. And this is the string of hearts. And this is the variegated version as well. So fun story around the variegated string of hearts. It was absolutely massive. I think it was over 2.5 meters long in the very first property that I had. It then decided to throw itself off the shelf. I grabbed the strings essentially, and because I grabbed it, it was so heavy on the soil side, the soil dropped. It snapped every single stem at the soil level, so I was left holding a whole bunch of stems with no roots. So all I did is, instead of panicking, take off some of the lowest hearts on those stems, shove it in some water, let it root out. I was massively disappointed because that plant was absolutely huge. And then I waited to see what was going to happen with it. They all rooted out. This happened with both the variegated and the non-variegated string of hearts. Ironically enough, the non-variegated string of hearts did not take to rooting at all, so lost all of those, but the variegated ones did survive. So fun fact there. Moving on to some of the next plants now. Let me grab the next one, and it's going to be an Anthurium. This is an Anthurium papillanium hybrid, if I'm not mistaken. Quite which hybrid, I'm not entirely sure, but you might be able to see here some of the nice corrugated leaves. I think this is a smaller form Anthurium. I don't think these leaves get absolutely huge. I might be wrong, but for me, this has been an exceptionally slow grower. It had issues with rooting out. It got down to the one leaf situation, and then it would grow a second leaf, and then maybe it might keep both the leaves and then go for a third one, but it would never go more than 3. But at the moment it's got 3, and there is signs that there might be a fourth one, so I'm hoping it will keep these and go for another one as well. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you might be able to notice the damp sphagnum moss that I've got wrapped around the stem. And this, from what I've seen and what I've experienced actually, gives the Anthurium a bit of an illusion that it's actually climbing up something, so it gives it a bit of a support. I call it its little scarf, and I make sure that that's dampened up as well, because some of those aerial roots can go into it, and that way around I tend to find that you'll keep more leaves, and also the leaves will start getting larger. So that's a little trick, and I'll show you an example of that just now. Let me just pick up that plant. So an example of much larger leaves, this, and I'll bring it up closer so you might be able to see the size of the leaf, and I'll do the usual Kaylee and heads just so you can understand size. This is the Anthurium metallicum, and you can see there's a slightly smaller leaf. That was a newer leaf, but that started growing in the middle of spring. And in the UK, for those of you who do live in the UK, they know that this spring was a bit of a weird one. We had abnormally warm few days in March. I don't know if that's so uncommon these days. I think we're getting more and more of that. But then it got quite cold, and I think that stunted the growth of this specific leaf. This was the previous leaf, and the oldest, most mature leaf, which was absolutely huge, dropped off recently. I've still got the petiole attached to the stem because I like to let the plant reabsorb those nutrients. And there is a new growth point just there. So I'm sure this has always been a prolific grower for me and consistently got big, big leaves. But again, you might be able to see the moistened sphagnum moss around that stem, and not an Anthurium, I have to say, that has got particularly chunky roots, but I've recently moved all of my Anthuriums into net pots and they are loving it. I have tried terracotta for some of them. It's okay. They struggle a bit with it. Net pots are the way forward with a chunky aroid soil mix. I've got the video on my channel, and if you want the ingredients for that as well, I'll drop a link in the description of this video down below as well. So let me put this back and show you the next plant. So the next plant is a plant, it's the only orchid that I've got in my conservatory. All my other orchids are out and about in regular household humidity. This one I wanted to give it the best chance of survival. And I think I've definitely done a video on this on my Instagram. I'm not sure if I've done it on here. And I cannot remember what the full scientific, it's something Maxillaria in terms of this orchid. But you might be able to see, and I'll bring it in a bit closer. You've got these bulbous growths and you've got kind of grass-like foliage. And you might be able to see one or two of the blooms that are still left on this plant there. They're like tiny, tiny blooms. There was a lot more of this. But the cool thing about this, and the common name for this, is the coconut pie orchid, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a reason for that. This is a fragrant orchid. This smells like coconut pie. It's absolutely insane. Very, very, very cool plant. You don't see these coming up very often, and you definitely don't see them coming up very often in a blooming size. But I was lucky to come across one of these in a local plant shop called the Plant Den. For those people in the UK, they do have some really cool and unusual plants on a regular basis, so do check them out. But very, very, very cool orchid. And I water this and I give this the same care as all my other orchids and some of my other Phalaenopsis orchids. So once a week, usually on a Sunday, all of my orchids will get their cache pot filled with water, a couple of drops of baby bio orchid food every week. So with all my orchids, I fertilize weekly. So that will sit in that water and fertilizer liquid for about 10 minutes. After that, I'll drain it out, put it back in the pot, put it back on the shelf, done. That's all I do for all my orchids. And it's become a bit of a very therapeutic, ongoing task that I have every Sunday. I know that I need to water all my orchids. So yeah, that is the coconut pie orchid. Right, let me put this down and I'll grab the next plant. Now the next plant is two of the same type of plants. So you might be able to see in front of me here is an Anthurium vittariifolium, or a king Anthurium. This here being its newest leaf, this being the oldest leaf. But this was another one that struggled a bit with only keeping 2 or 3 leaves. This one had issues with roots when I first got it, so it kind of pulled it back considerably. I lost all of the really, really mature, roughly leaves, so it went back to slightly more immature leaves. Again, I've put it in a net pot and it seems to be doing really well. Relatively not fussy Anthuriums and relatively forgiving, I would say. So that's something to bear in mind. This is another Anthurium vittariifolium, and this was a plug plant from Turner Tropical here in the UK that I bought last summer. And you might be able to see the yellowing leaf here. That's how tiny the leaves were, and that's how large they are now. That is obviously the newest leaf that's coming in. It's unfurling. It's still got a bit of that blush to it, but it's got all of the abs and it's got all of the ruffles that I really like about the King Anthurium. Really, really cool plant. This was an insurance plant because I thought this was going to deteriorate, but actually this is now overtaking the original plant. So very, very cool plant. If you want to get into your slightly rarer Anthuriums, do not go for the Anthurium varroquaneum, especially if you've not had a few of them and you know what you're doing. I still don't have a Queen Anthurium because I'm too worried that it's too fussy. This is a good place to start. The King Anthurium generally it's a bit cheaper as well than the Queen Anthurium and a lot less fussy. Right, moving on to the next plants. Right, the next plant that I want to talk about is this beauty here, and this is my mother plant of the Begonia seismorii. And let me see if I can bring it a bit closer and maybe tilt it enough. Can you see the little hair-like structures all on top of the leaf? This has fondly always had a nickname, and I don't usually name my plants, but this is Chewy for Chewbacca because, well, obvious reasons. But you might be able to see I've left one of the leaves that's about to go, but it's a relatively large leaf. This leaf has been around, I think, for about 1.5 years now. So it's done what it needs to do. You can see some of the older leaves. I let them there until they fully want to come off, essentially. I just ripped out some inflorescences that they had recently. Most of my plants, even the begonias, I'll let them bloom one time just so I can see what they look like. But I am brutal. I will just literally rip off the blooms because I want the plant to put its energy into more foliage, because that's what I find really cool about these plants. And I will show you the back of the leaves as well. They are also really, really cool. They've got a slight red tinge to them. This plant has been in loads of different lighting conditions and it's doing really well. It doesn't have the usual issues that a lot of the begonias have, where they start going crispy or they start having issues with the soil and everything. It's still in the soil that it came in, and if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, I bought this from a plant nursery around here, but it originated from Dibley's, and Dibley's is one that Jane Perrone on her podcast On the Ledge always talks about. Dibley's, especially on her earlier videos. If you haven't discovered Jane Perrone, do check her out, especially if you like listening to podcasts. She's got some very cool information. I think it was probably on her first few episodes that she was talking a bit more about Dibley's, and it's a relatively well-kept secret. I was not aware of it at all. They're based in Wales, but they do specialize specifically in begonias, gesneriads, things like that. So African violets and other ones that they've got there. And you can get them quite cheap. You'll get plug plants that are quite small, but you can grow them out relatively quickly. Very, very cool plant. And if you want to see more of these videos and we do some of the other shelves, you will see the propagations that I have from this plant, and that one's actually larger than this at the moment. So, right, let me get the next plant on the shelf. And the next plant is another Anthurium. This is a new addition to the collection, and I picked it up from a lovely, lovely plant lady locally to me. It was an eBay purchase recently, and I was buying this plant and another one I'll show you potentially again if we do more videos on the other shelves. But she was based locally, and I'm just like, there's no point of putting the plant through that much plant stress by going through the postal service and things like that. And I'm just like, do you mind if I just pop around and pick it up? And she was just like, yeah, absolutely fine. So we had a lovely chat as well there. So I got to know a bit more about her plant collection, which is insane. But it was really nice to meet a planty peep like that. I'm also planning on organizing, I'm just trying to finalize the venue at the moment for my local area, a plant swap, the first ever plant swap as far as I'm aware in the area. So it'd be really nice for some of our local planty enthusiasts around here to kind of, and we'll all get together and meet each other IRL or in real life rather than just online, because there's a lot of people that are local to me here that we only ever talk to each other through Instagram, but it'd be really nice to meet each other. So without further ado, say hello to my Anthurium regale, or regale, I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce that. Still relatively juvenile because these leaves can get absolutely huge. You'll be able to see again the sphagnum moss that I wrap around the stem in order to kind of promote that growth. That lovely lady had this in just pure sphagnum. I'm not comfortable growing in just pure sphagnum. I would worry that I would either underwater or overwater, and especially with something like an Anthurium, I'd like to make sure that I'm watering correctly. So I've moved it into a net pot with my aroid soil mix, and it's doing exceptionally well. I don't know whether or not it will come across on camera, but right there, there is some new growth that is coming in, and hopefully that might focus there. There we go. I'm not sure if it is, but it is slowly getting there, and I've got some lovely aerial roots that are really enjoying that sphagnum. But yeah, Anthurium regale, not had this for an exceptionally long time, but so far so good. For somebody who's never seen this in real life, this has actually got relatively succulent leaves. Not I think I've ever come across an Anthurium that has as succulent of a leaf as a Clarinarium, but definitely as succulent as, or as thick of a leaf as my crystallinum. So a very, very, very cool Anthurium. I'm really looking forward to this getting larger and growing huge. So let me put this back down and go on to the next plant. So the next plant on the list is another Anthurium. I actually found some really, really good Anthuriums online recently at a relatively good price, essentially. So I was able to pick up a few of them recently. This was from another lovely plant lady on eBay. We had loads of conversations, and I think she might watch me on here. So if you do see this video, hi. It's doing exceptionally well since you sent it over. This is an Anthurium forgetii, and I'm still coming to terms with it. I am growing this in pon. Loads of my planting friends were saying, look, you need to try pon, and I did, and it's going really, really well for a lot of my plants, and I know that a lot of Anthuriums love pon. So this one is doing exceptionally well as well. And you might be able to see with the forgetii, there isn't much of that sinus at the top. It's fused, so you don't get that heart-shaped lobing at the top. But you can see, if I'm not mistaken, this is the newest leaf, so you can start to see some of the markings. They're quite silvery, and they're coming through a bit more strongly now in relation to some of the older leaves. So really, really looking forward to seeing this grow. But I know this is one that stays relatively small in size. But yeah, one that I'm looking forward to growing. Let me put this down and we'll go on to the next plant. Right, the next few plants actually are not that rare or uncommon to find. You can get them in garden centres. Some of these were personal challenges to myself, and other ones just kind of happened. This was a bit of a challenge to myself. So this is an Aglaonema, or a Chinese evergreen. And I think it might be the cultivar Maria. I'm not entirely sure. Because obviously when you get small plug plants like this, you just get them in a garden center and it says plant mix. And I'm just like, yeah, thanks. But I had an Aglaonema before. It rotted out relatively quickly, but it was also one of the ones that were highly colored. And if you follow Summer Rain Oaks on here with Homestead Brooklyn, great channel, by the way, do give her a check out. She will always talk about the Aglaonemas that are slightly more colored tend to be a bit fussier. The slightly greener varieties do a lot better. And I bought this as a small plug plant that had 3 leaves. This has also now got 3 leaves. But when I first got it, it pretty much rotted away 2 of its leaves, got some new leaves, rotted those away. I only ever had 1 leaf. Now it's finally bouncing back and it's finding its groove. With Aglaonemas, a lot of people ask me, are you going to get the Aglaonema pictum tricolor with the really cool camouflage leaves? No is the answer to that, until I get the care of this down pat, so I know what I need to do for that plant if I do decide to get it. And even people that I know that have had the Aglaonema pictum tricolor say that it can be quite fussy and it can require different things than most other Aglaonemas as well. So probably not going to be getting that anytime soon. But this is doing really well. And as I said, this was a bit of a challenge to myself and it's doing okay. So yay. Right, let me grab the next plant. The next plant that I have is, I think, either a Tenanthe. I think it might be a Tenanthe. It's not a Stromanthe, I don't think. And I don't think it's a Calathea. It might be either Calathea or a Tenanthe. I'm not entirely sure. But this, and again, I'll put the name of it up here as well. Obviously, it's a prayer plant and it's got the telltale purple back leaves. It's not one of the most exciting ones, and I don't think this is one that you see a lot of people buying because it doesn't have the really super ornate leaves. But I found with these ones that are slightly on the plainer side, they are less fussy than the highly colored and ornate prayer plants as well. And just to be clear, you might be able to see very little brown tips on this. This has been on tap water since day one. This also started off as a tiny, smaller plug plant than the Aglaonema that we were just looking at before. And just look at the size of it. It still does what most prayer plants do, which is close its leaves up at night and then open them up during the day to let the light in. But this is growing like a weed. Something that is quite interesting that I've discovered recently, I went slightly off the beaten track when it comes to my prayer plants because a lot of people are just like, it needs slightly denser soil. It still needs to be airy, but it needs to retain some of that moisture because they love moisture and they love humidity and all of these things. These, yes, they might be in a plastic pot. I would never put them in a terracotta pot because I'd probably have to water them once every day or two. But these are in the same chunky aroid soil mix, so very light and airy, that I have all my philodendrons, all of my anthuriums and everything like that in. And it's done them really, really well. So try that with some of your Calatheas if you've got any issues with that. It just might mean you need to water it a bit more frequently. But if you tend to overlove your plants and tend to overwater them, that shouldn't be as much of an issue, and they will thank you for it. Now let me put this down. I'll show you another prayer plant that I have. This is a very cool prayer plant that I have, and I wish that it was larger. But, and to be fair, this is a relatively common one. You might be able to see that is, and you can see the, showing you all the realities here as well. I haven't snipped off the slightly crispy leaf, but it's not got any pests or anything like that. So I'm leaving it in there to just reabsorb into the plant. And then eventually when it fully crisps up, I'll kind of chop it off. But this is, and you can see the backs of the leaves are so cool. This is a Calathea. I'm pretty sure this is a Calathea. This is a Calathea makoyana. And this is a plant that, again, started off as a plug plant, and it's grown slower than the rest of it, but it is more ornate. Like I said, they tend to be fussier. And I would love to have this in a larger version because it doesn't do it justice on a video or on photos on how cool these leaves are. But at this point in time, look behind me, I ain't got that much space. So I'd like to have a large one of these. It would do better in here than in the regular house in terms of humidity and everything else. But I'd rather keep some of the big areas and space that I have in this plant room, essentially, or conservatory or hothouse or whatever you want to call it, for the slightly larger aroids. So very, very cool plant. Not particularly difficult, but not particularly easy either for a Calathea, but so far so good. Again, same in the light airy soil mix instead of a Calathea mix. So let me show you, I think, the penultimate prayer plant that I have, and yeah, let's get into that. Now I know that this might not be the most exciting Calathea that you might see, and I think this is the Calathea rufibarba. And you can see it's very plain green leaves. There's some ruffling on them. It does also have, and I'm trying to find a good example, it does have the slightly more maroon backsides. And I don't know whether or not you might be able to see, no, it's not really coming across on camera. But if you find one of these and you find it in a plant store or a garden center, just take your hand and run it underneath the leaf. Thank me later. It feels like the softest bunny ever. It's very, very fuzzy, very, very soft, very much a tactile Calathea. And again, look, absolutely zero. Maybe there's a one or two browning bits at the bottom on the older leaves, but this is tap water. And before you ask, I live in a very, very hard water area here, and these are all doing fine. I've just got them used to having that and not on filtered water all the time. But yeah, awesome, awesome one. And I have to say, if all of my Calatheas or all my prayer plants would die out, would I get them again? Probably not. I'd need the space for some of my aroids. But this is one that I think I would probably buy again because it's just so, so cool. And I don't think this does particularly badly outside in regular household humidity either. So Calathea rufibarba, very, very cool. I think last prayer plant now. Right, and the last prayer plant is, and again, I might need to put the name at the top. It's something star, and I cannot remember. But this beauty of an ornate plant, and I'm trying to see if I can bring in the one leaf that does also have some of that pink blush on the lines. But you can see very, very ornate. Also not fussy, also not particularly brown and crispy leaves. Same thing in my aroid mix. Who would have known? And it does still have the telltale burgundy backs. But the leaves of this, and I think pretty much on all of them, with the exception of the rufibarba, but the rufibarba's got the fuzz or the pubescence essentially on the back of the leaves. All of the prayer plants that I have got slightly more succulent leaves. They're not that paper thin that you'd get on the very, very ornate ones, which means for me, they're hardier. So they'll do a lot better with a slight bit of underwatering, a slight bit of overwatering. They're not as particular as other plants. I've only ever really had most of them in here, so I don't know if they'd do much better in household humidity, but I would hazard a guess that this one might. So this might be an interesting one. It's not one that people talk about too much, but yeah, very, very, very cool prayer plant. And I think we're on to the last plant, and I will pick that up now. Right, and the last plant, and this might be slight cheating because this is on the floor. It's not technically on the shelf, but it's next to the shelf. This you might be able to see, and if I bring it in even closer, I'll give you the usual Kaylee Ellen head test so you can see quite how large that leaf is the Philodendron, and you might be able to tell from the back of these leaves, subhastatum. So the subhastatum has got the kind of telltale red backs, slight ruffling on the leaves, but can we just appreciate how large it can get? The thing with some of these larger leaves, and I don't know if it's to do with the light levels, but it's pretty much lost most of the maroon on the back of the leaves. You can see a tiny bit of a blush there, but it's losing some of the backs of the red backs on the leaves. This one still has a very, very deep red on the back of that leaf, and it might just be because it's getting quite a lot of light basically, but this grows like weeds for me, and you might be able to see obviously my janky support sticks are always going to be my janky support sticks, but you can see this is a relatively large subhastatum with a new leaf coming in as well. A slight crisping on the new leaf that I've just noticed there, but it's because we've had some extremely warm and less humid sunny days basically in the UK, so some of the plants in here did struggle a bit. This does grow like a weed, but it doesn't propagate particularly easily for me. I've only ever tried it successfully in dampened sphagnum moss. I've not tried it in perlite yet. I might do that. I might do a cutting soon and try it in perlite. I might even try it in pon and then see how it goes. But this is an exceptionally cool plant and a very fast grower for me, I tend to find. But if you also see quite how small amount of soil is in the bottom there, and yes, it's in a net pot, the roots are very, very fine in comparison to a lot of other philodendrons that might have chunkier roots. So bear that in mind. It doesn't need a huge amount of watering, but a very, very cool plant nonetheless. Right, let me put this down and let's wrap up the video, shall we? Right. So hopefully you've enjoyed. That was just one shelf, and just looking around, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 shelves. And that's not considering the stuff on the window ledges. So if you do like this video and if you want to see more videos with the rest of the shelves, slightly longer videos like this, and I can give you a bit of a guided tour, let me know in the comments down below. If you've got any questions, comments, again, drop them down below. I'd love to have that conversation with you. And yeah, in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.